There are times when transitions don't work, or at least they don't seem to work. And understanding what's going on is helpful. So let's just take a look real quickly here. I'm going to manufacture something. So here on stand up 5, I'll mark an in point and an out point right here in the middle of the clip and put that on my timeline. And then I'll grab a second shot. How about loading the filter? And again, I'm just going to grab an in point and an out point right here in the middle. And put that on my timeline. Now I'm going to change to my effects library and try to drop a dissolve on there. And it works perfectly. No issues whatsoever. But you have to understand what's going on here. So I'm going to delete that dissolve for just a second and illustrate this. So I'm going to stretch this video up. Let me turn snapping on so that I'm lined up. So what happens when I put that dissolve, so I put a 1 second dissolve on there, which means it started 15 frames before the end of this clip, and it continues 15 frames past the beginning of this clip. So effectively, what Resolve is going to do is it's going to start this bottom clip 15 frames earlier, and it's going to extend this top clip 15 frames longer. And then it's going to ramp the transparency of this top clip out over the course of that second. Right? So this clip is going to have to play 15 frames longer than it would have if it was a jump cut. And this clip is going to have to start playing 15 frames earlier and play for an extra 15 frames than it would have if it were a jump cut. And the effect is just what we saw, right?
Don't cut.
So doing what I just did here is exactly the same. Let me undo, 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 as putting a 1 second cross dissolve here.
Okay.
It works because it can take these two clips and stretch them, right? It can stretch the out point of this first clip and make it longer. It can stretch the end point of this second clip and make it longer. And that way you can have content from both showing as the transition is in progress. That's what's supposed to happen. Let me go back to my media pool here. But what happens if we grab two clips that don't have extra? So I'm going to come back to my loading this filter. And this version, I do not have any in or out points on. I'm going to drag that down here to the timeline. Let me move to the end of it. And then I'm going to grab another one at random here about the final cup. There we go. Again, I haven't set any in or out points, so I'm going to drag the entirety of that media down here and touch them right up against each other with snapping. Okay, so now I've got a jump cut from one shot to the other. If I try to put a transition on this, and again, I'll just grab a cross dissolve, it won't let me. I'm going to try again. Clearly I'm doing something wrong. No, it won't let me. It won't let the dissolve go there. And the reason it won't let the dissolve go there is there's nothing to stretch, right? I can't make the out point of this first clip any longer because there's nothing there. I can't make the end point of this second clip any longer because there's nothing there. There's no way to get these two to overlap. And if I can't make them overlap, there's nothing to create the transition from. So what I would have to do if I need a transition there is I need to shorten these a little bit. I need to move this out point earlier. I need to move this in point later. What if only one of them gets moved? Okay, so I'm going to change, let me delete this guy, and I am going to make an in point well into this second clip. Okay, and let me drag it down here. Let me move my original video down. So this first clip has no extra media, but this second clip does. So let's see what happens if I try to put a transition here. So if I put the cross dissolve on the left-hand side, it works. If I try to put it in the middle or on the right, it doesn't work. Right? So I can kind of put the transition there. It's just not going exactly where I want it to go.
And cut.
And that is because, let me delete that 1 second dissolve. Let me move that back up again. I cannot move this out point. I cannot make it any longer. But I can move this in point. I can make this in point 1 second earlier. Which means I can fade this top clip out over that last 1 second. So I can kind of make the transition, right? It's perfect, except
And cut.
it's not where I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be centered. I can't have it centered because this clip, this top clip, couldn't stretch. All right, so let me undo those real quickly. So that is if you're trying to put a transition in and it will not go, or it goes but it's shorter than you want it to be and you can't make it longer, or it goes but it will only go to one side. What's happening is that one of the clips is at the very edge of the media that you imported. Either your endpoint on the second clip is very, very close or at the beginning of that clip, or possibly the out point on the first clip is at the very end or almost at the very end of that media. And that's why it's fighting you. The other thing that you might see, let me put together something a little more realistic here. So I'm just going to grab stand up 5 and 6 and drop them down here on the timeline. However they may be set up, I'm not actually worried about it. So here's stand up 5 and here's stand up 6, and probably there's a jump cut between them.
Oh, they'll cut.
Okay, yep.
Oh, they'll cut.
Yeah, so there's a terrible jump cut there. And let's ignore the fact that the audio is glitchy too. But let's pretend I wanted to hide this with a piece of B-roll.
Below, they'll cut. Now stop.
So what we're seeing here is him steaming. So let me grab a close-up of the steaming, and we'll put an in point and an out point. Right, and we're going to use this to cover that jump cut. So I'm going to drag just the video down as a piece of B-roll. Okay, that's longer than it needs to be. I'm going to grab my razor blade tool and trim that real quickly. Delete the part I don't need. All right, so you can see what I've done here is I've used this piece of B-roll to hide that jump cut. So let's just take a look at it.
Milk. Below, they'll cut. Now stop.
Okay. So we're going from this wide shot of Scott to this close-up of him steaming the milk. Let me zoom in on that just a little bit. And that is fine. But I decide I want to make it a little bit smoother, so I'm going to put a dissolve and fade that in. All right, so I'm going to go to my to my effects library and grab my cross dissolve and drop it here on the beginning.
Below, they'll cut. Now stop.
And it broke it, right? Now my cool effect is not working. I haven't hidden that jump cut. So what's happening in this case is, let me delete the cross dissolve. I could do the same thing by using this fade control, right? I'm going to fade this second shot in.
Below, they'll cut.
But what's happening is that I'm seeing through because this top thing is now partially transparent. And it's transparent over where my jump cut is. So if I were to just take this and start it earlier so that the transition is done before we reach the jump cut.
Below, they'll cut. Now stop.
Perfect. Again, we're ignoring the fact that he says cut and stop. Just looking at the video here.
Below, they'll cut.
All right, so let me undo all of that. So I could do the same thing. I've got my PCB roll and it's perfectly located. If when I drag my cross dissolve down, I just left justify it, right? So I put it, and even here,
below, they'll cut.
I see it coming through, right? So I'm still going to have to either stretch my clip a little bit or move it a little bit earlier. What I need is for the dissolve to be finished. Here we can see the end of the dissolve. It needs to be finished by the time we get to that jump cut. Otherwise, we will see through the partially transparent B-roll to the jump cut underneath.
Milk below the cut. Now stop.
So that's what happens when transitions don't work as expected. Either your in point and out point that you're trying to work between don't have enough slack, enough extra footage for the transition to work, or possibly you've positioned a transition in such a way that as it's transitioning, you're seeing through the effect to something undesirable underneath it. All right, that about wraps it up for transitions.